I am the greatest.
I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
You won't do shit. Just stick and move. And making you understand. Now stick and move. Keep your hands up.
Welcome to a new episode of the Stick and Move podcast. I'm your host, Trey, and today I am talking about the top 3 biggest boxing moments in boxing history. Now, this one was very tough, guys. I'm going to have some cliche moments because, let's be honest with you, it's a cliche for a reason, and these moments are, not only in the pantheon of boxing lore, but in sports and in regular history books in general. Some of these biggest moments I've actually talked about in my world history class. So, as a teacher. So, man, this was such a fun one to do research on. But just to break out of that cliche monotony of my number 1 and my number 2, my number 3 I made as a personal favorite. It's probably on none of your number 3 or on your top 5, maybe not even your top 10 list. But just to make this episode a little bit more interesting and to throw you guys back for a loop, to be like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that big moment. For that, my number 3 is when Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield, their second fight, and the Fan Man incident. Now, what made this boxing match intriguing was that it was coming off the legendary bout of Riddick Bowe, Evander Holyfield won. That's one of the great. I mean, I even did an episode scoring that fight, and it was just like two Goliath monsters fighting in the ring, giving everything they had. And the people wanted that rematch. And this was an era where the biggest champs were going at each other. They didn't care. They didn't care about undefeated records. They didn't care about, I never been down on the mat before. As the second fight, we would see Riddick Bowe go down in. And even Evander Holyfield switched trainers to Emmanuel Stewart and wearing those yellow trunks that Crunk Gym always produces. But back to the Fan Man. Look, this is, like I said, this is personally a favorite moment of mine. And this fight, in my opinion, leading into that 7th round where he would crash into the ring at the Caesars Palace with about 153, 154 left in that 7th round, you see that Evander Holyfield is approaching Riddick Bowe in the center of that ring. Because let's be honest, this is one of those rare heavyweight fights where they were pretty much fighting in the center of the ring the entire time, as most boxers in the 90s and most heavyweight boxers did in the 90s. And all of a sudden, you just see, I remember watching this. And I remember watching, and all of a sudden, I just see Evander Holyfield step back. And I'm like, whoa, what's happening here? And Riddick Bowe is kind of caught off guard, doesn't know if he should go forward and I guess strike Evander Holyfield when the ref would come in and push Riddick Bowe to his corner, as the Fan Man would end up getting one of the biggest beatings that a civilian I have ever seen in my life endure. All of a sudden, the Fan Man crashes into the ropes with this propeller going off. Jim Lampley, all the legends on HBO were commenting what the heck is going on. That Larry Merchant was like, I've never seen anything like this before. Paraphrasing, by the way. And all of a sudden, Lampley say this is a monstrosity enduring moment into the ring.
Someone is telling.
And somebody in a parachute has just landed on the edge of the ring, has been pulled away by security guards. The fight has been brought to a halt. There's a massive melee at ringside as this fellow with a motorized parachute has landed right on top of spectators and officials at ringside. He's in the midst of a mass of security guards now. Rock Newman, Riddick Bowe's manager, was right there. This is a monumental disaster. Right now, police are filing by me at ringside and grabbing this gentleman who has created a monstrosity of an interruption in the bout.
The parachute would even wrap around the lights as the fans and the trainers of both boxers would engulf the fan man and beat the living hell out of him. Like I mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, they beat him unconsciously. Now, one thing that I want to bring up is that, interestingly enough, the commentators, Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley, were saying the fight was on, the fight would stop, and they would say, would this break be good for Riddick Bowe? Now, me personally, I had Riddick Bowe winning the fight, but it was a little bit more of an even fight as Evander Holyfield was having a lot of success. And going into that fight, Riddick Bowe came in overweight. So people were speculating that maybe this break with the fan man ended up being a 21-minute break, by the way, was going to be beneficial for Riddick Bowe. And in my opinion, it was the complete opposite. I actually think he got ice cold. Me growing up, guys, something about me, I used to be a pretty good street ball basketball legend in my home area. And I remember we would play 2 or 3 games, and I always wanted to play nonstop in between every game. If I took a break in between any fight, between any game, I was not going to get back up. Like, it was one of those, like, I'm cooled down. I don't want to get back up and continue playing. I think that's exactly I'm not comparing my basketball game to Riddick Bowe, never will. But I think Riddick Bowe, as a big guy, was just like cooled down. He was kind of, when they figured out the situation with Fan Man, Riddick Bowe will come into the fight. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whoever you're rooting for, Evander Holyfield would take that second fight. Now, I don't know. This is just one of those. This was more of a favor. Are there bigger moments? Absolutely. Like I said, when I was doing research on this episode, it was just like, what am I going to do? I cannot leave out the heavy hitters. But yeah, so my number 3, guys, is Fan Man, coming in that 7th round. Tell me in the comments y'all's memory of that fight. Did I put it too high? Are there other memorable moments that should have been my number 3? Like I said, there are bigger moments in boxing, but that one to me was just a more of a personal favorite because it was just so unique that I never seen before. Okay. My number 2, guys, is obviously Mike Tyson losing to Buster Douglas. Now, look, my number 2, guys, is that 10th round knockout in Tokyo, Japan, between Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson. I've talked about this fight numerous times throughout the history of this episode. This boxing fight fundamentally shifted not only boxing history or the future of boxing, as we've all known and we've talked about a million times on this show or throughout the comments in this history, that Mike Tyson was never the same after this fight. He would end up going to prison a few years after this fight. It was just like the beginning of the stumbling block of seeing a man that was unbeatable at the time, probably the greatest boogeyman of all time, to becoming beaten. And it's so interesting because in this fight, not only did it shake the boxing world, but it shook the world completely.
Mike Tyson, ow.
We had just studied about Martin Luther King having a dream, and we said he could do it too.
Nothing can take away from the inspiration of Buster's beating the invincible.
Parade honoring Douglas will be held Wednesday morning in the Ohio capital city. Douglas says he will only honor a rematch with Tyson after fighting #1 contender Evander Holyfield in June. They want to hold that fight on the Ohio.
As a 42-1 underdog, guys. 42-1 underdog. I just did an episode on Sonny Liston, and he was an 8-1. Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay at the time, was an 8-1 underdog to Sonny Liston, considered unbelievable odds at the time to overcome and beat the boogeyman of Sonny Liston. Douglas was a 42-1. And not only would boxing change after that, not only would the stoic figure of Mike Tyson change after that, but the sports world, even people that knew nothing of boxing, was alerted of this loss to Mike Tyson. That Mike Tyson, the scariest man in boxing history, actually got defeated. And here's something that's interesting that I love about that fight is that Buster Douglas did something most boxers had never done. If I'm not mistaken, no boxer ever done. No, I'm wrong. Was Mike Tyson knocked him down, and Buster Douglas was able to come up, and it was not one of those where Mike Tyson grazed a little bit of his shoulder or his glove, and he fell down. Mike Tyson hit him clean, and Buster Douglas goes down. People thinking the fight is over, as Mike Tyson hit one of those iconic punches that hurt around the world. And Buster Douglas comes up and finishes the fight. Now, is that a cliche pick as my number 2? Most people have it at number 1 because, like I said, it changed the world completely. Like I said, boxing novices, women. I mean, I'm not trying to be sexist here, but women who cared nothing about sports were like, did Mike Tyson actually lose? Like, it was headline news on headline newspapers, the first thing on the front cover of newspapers at the time. It was on it was breaking news on every channel on television. Now, so when I have this one, my number 2, it's just a big moment in world history. And it was beyond sports. It was beyond boxing. It just gave the underdog. It made you realize that, you know what? Anything can happen in boxing. That's really the first time I remember hearing that any punch can take down any boxer. That any boxer has a chance or a puncher's chance. I remember hearing that phrase for the first time. It was a puncher's chance. And Buster Douglas overdid that. Unfortunately, guys, like I said, Mike Tyson would never recover after that fight. And Buster Douglas would immediately lose the heavyweight title to Evander Holyfield. I mean, this defeat, this 42-1 odds of Buster Douglas winning the fight, threw a monkey wrench into the whole heavyweight division in the early 90s leading up to that fight. And interestingly enough, I brought this up many times. I know it's annoying, but we thought, where does boxing go after Mike Tyson defeat? After Mike Tyson serving 3 years, and the 90s did a sensational job in boxing. Roy Jones carried the torch. Oscar De La Hoya carried the torch. Julio Cesar Chavez brought in the Mexican audience. But interestingly enough, maybe it's just Don King. Love him or hate him, maybe he is the reason why boxing was able to persevere throughout the 90s with Mike Tyson after he lost his bout and his life taking a different trajectory until his renaissance a couple of decades ago. But anyways, that is my number 2. Now, my number 1 is the Rumble in the Jungle, the Rope-a-Dope. Now, interestingly enough, this is one of those fights. I know, like I said, I've talked about this millions of times. Even the trainers of Muhammad Ali did not want him to get into the ring with George Foreman, who at the time was 40-0, a big bad bully of a boxer, considered the bad guy of the heavyweight division, considering how sweet of a man that George Foreman would later on be revealed as. Look, this fight that happened in Zaire, Ali, considering at the time was a 4-1 underdog, this was who he was. This was a different Muhammad Ali. He was a little bit of a softer Muhammad Ali. Like I said, to where Muhammad Ali's trainers were begging him not to take this fight was what he did to Joe Frazier, knocking him out in that second round. What he did to Ken Norton, also knocking him out in that second round, which Ken Norton at the time was, he was the Black Hercules of boxing at the time, where he was just this stoic figure, statue of a man. And here comes George Foreman destroying him. Joe Frazier. Down goes Frazier, which, by the way, should have probably been my number one. That was the fight where people were like, uh-oh, what is Muhammad Ali, who at this time was already getting, you got to realize when he had his suspension, he got a lot of hate, a lot of death threats. But by this time, Muhammad Ali, his character was becoming loved, and he was becoming a fan favorite at this time. And him taking on, the monsters of that division of Joe Frazier and Ken Norton and everybody, and eventually George Foreman. That goes to, Muhammad Ali showed the people, I want to take on the best. Even though he wasn't the Muhammad Ali pre-suspension, he came back and still challenged the boogeyman of the division of Joe Frazier and Ken Norton and Ron Lyle and George Foreman, all these great boxers at the time. Muhammad Ali was in there. In my opinion, what this fight did was kind of give Muhammad Ali the sense that this rope a dope worked, as it's already well established. George Foreman would punch himself out going into that 8th round, and with about 14 seconds left, Muhammad Ali uses the jab to get himself out of the ropes and ends up knocking him out in that 14 seconds, shocking the world. And I kind of feel like when the next year would be the Thriller in Manila for Muhammad Ali, a lot of people think, now that I think about it, because one of our early episodes we did was scoring the Thriller in Manila. And, I gave a lot of the middle rounds to Joe Frazier, as Joe Frazier was this relentless boxer. But I feel that Muhammad Ali was like, I did this against George Foreman, I could do this to Joe Frazier, where he was kind of rope-a-doping. And it's interesting because early on in that fight in the Thriller in Manila, you see Muhammad Ali I felt like Muhammad Ali could have knocked out Joe Frazier in that first round just with that jab. If I'm not mistaken, he even wobbles him in the first and third round early on in the Thriller in Manila. And then all of a sudden, he puts himself against the ropes for the majority of the rest of the fight, going into that 13th and 14th round, when Muhammad Ali would finally turn it around and use the jab and use his hooks and use his speed that he had conserved, kind of rope-a-doping Joe Frazier as well. The rope-a-dope, in my opinion, in Zaire, in the Rumble of the Jungle, is number one, because it was a moment in time, not only in boxing history, but where Muhammad Ali captivated the audience beyond what boxing had known before. You got to understand something, guys. There was over 50 million viewers of pay-per-view or closed circuit TV. This fight grossed over 100 million at that time, which, if I'm not mistaken, due to inflation, is about 500, almost $500 million now. So that goes to show you the influence that this fight had. And if it wasn't for that 8th round where Muhammad Ali uses a jab, out rope-a-dopes George Foreman. Now, I know I'm all over on this number one, but I just think that there was this genius level to it. I think he brought that fight plan to Joe Frazier in the Thriller in Manila. Coincidentally, I'm in Manila, by the way, and just changed boxing. So, guys, these are my top 3 biggest boxing moments. The other one I had, of course, was Down Goes Frazier. Tyson getting arrested, that famous scene where he's with his handcuffs and he's being escorted to the car. The Phantom Punch that I just talked about with a few previous episodes with Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay at the time. The Suzy Q Punch of Rocky Marciano. I mean, that's probably one of the greatest knockouts of all time. Probably the best in slow motion. I even considered going outside the ring, even though it was kind of inside the ring, and at least protest the Vietnam. I considered that one. I was this close for having that one my number one. And of course, Tyson versus Douglas. So, guys, in the comments, go ahead and tell me other iconic moments, the biggest moments in boxing history that I may have left off. I appreciate everything, guys. Go ahead and leave a comment. Give me some episode ideas. And as I always like to say, don't forget to stick and move, baby.
I am the greatest.
I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
You won't do shit. Just stick and move. And making you understand. Now stick and move.